Good afternoon, we're here at the Glass Lady Studio, and today we're going to talk about the ins and outs of cutting different types of glass. Some glass ranges anywhere from the piece I'm holding to a real smooth pattern where you can cut on either side of it easily, to glass that has a very distinct pattern, such as this one. This side is smooth and this side has a pattern, all the way to in between, where both sides, the art glass tends to be a little bit hard to cut in general, harder. But one side generally has a smoother side, but it's still bumpier than, say, your spectrum glass that's real smooth. So we're going to talk about that, and I'll give you some demonstrations and some examples. Starting out, if you did not see the last show, this is a glass cutter, and they come in a variety of shapes and sizes. This is a Tuyo Cutter. It's a pistol grip because you hold it kind of like you would a pistol, I guess. And there's a few different brands in this design, but I tend to go towards the Tuyo. You hold it perpendicular to your glass. You always start at one end of your glass and you go all the way off to the other side. Even if you get halfway through and you go, this is not going well, you just have to keep going with it and start over. So one end of it, perpendicular to the glass, press down all the way across and off. You may or may not be able to see this, but about right here there's a score on that glass. This does not actually cut it, it just scores it, weakens it, if you will. Then take a running plier. This plier has a line on the top of it. I'm going to match that line up with the score on my glass, and if you can look into the jaws of this, the bottom part of it is just a little bit curved. So that pressure on the bottom pressing up, the top part's a little bit the other way. The pressure between the two will snap that score. So line it up, squeeze, and it's broke. So real quickly, that's just basically how you cut a piece of glass. Because of time, we're going to move right into our pattern. I have pre-cut a few pieces on this tulip pattern, and we're going to go through the different cutting methods with different textures of glass here. After I would pick out a pattern, I would number all of my pieces. I'll turn this around here. I have 2 copies of my pattern and I number them all equally. I then take one of the patterns and cut it all out, and that's what I use to trace onto the glass to cut the different shapes and colors out. So the next step would be I have the 3 tulip patterns, if you will here. This glass is relatively easy to cut, not a lot of texture to it. You could use either side. One thing you want to think about when you're doing glass is a lot of glass will have a grain to it, just like wood. And if I were to put my tulip pieces all kittywampus on here, you're going to see that when you cut them out. So you want to line them up. In this case, I line them up straight up and down as much as possible so that when I cut them, the different grains to the petals are going the proper way. Tracing it is real simple. It's just a simple old Sharpie marker. Hold it down. Go around your pieces. And put the number on. This marker will wash off later. Sharpie marker does wash off of glass. So while I finish doing that, I'm going to have you break over to Matt here, who is going to show us how to cut on textured glass. This is the background in this tulip. And this side has a very distinct pattern with heavy grooves in it and would not be easy to cut at all. Therefore, we trace our pattern pieces on the back side. There's no right or wrong as far as if this side is up, the smooth side when it's hanging in a window, or the back side, or the textured side. I tend to like the textured side being out. So then when I trace my pieces, because I've flipped my glass over, you have to flip your pattern pieces over too. So when you cut them out, you flip them down on the pattern and everything is the right way. So we'll let Matt go ahead and cut those out and explain, and I will quickly finish tracing these.
Yeah, so just like she said, she's traced it on the smooth side of the glass, which depending on your panel might be the side you're seeing or the side you're not seeing. So I'm just going to go ahead and cut these out. Once again, you want to make sure that when you're scoring the glass, you always start on one side and go all the way across. So you can see Becky sort of strategically trace these, so I have to make less cuts. So I can cut sort of this edge of that piece and this edge of that piece in one go.
Okay, Matt and I have both been working on these pieces for our pattern. Let me explain a little bit about glass as opposed to another surface such as paper or fabric with quilting. Putting together a stained glass piece is a lot like putting together a quilt because you're assembling all those different colors and fabrics together. But with glass, you cannot take your cutter and just trace around it like you would with a scissor. You have to, as we've talked about before, start at one end, go all the way off to the other end, and then break it away. Then you can do your next seam. Glass wants to break as straight as possible. So if you have something that has a lot of curves, this is a pretty simple beginner pattern, so we don't have any difficult curves here to do. But if you had, say, a circle, you have to, I'll draw a circle real quick as Matt's cutting. Oh, and there we go in a glass studio. You always have to be prepared to start over. With a circle, you'd have your circle shape, and you'd have to take your cutter and start here, wrap around, and go off this end and break that. And then you would go over on this angle, start here, go all the way off and break that. So it would take multiple cuts to cut a circle of glass out. Then from there, we're lucky enough in our day and age that we can go to a grinder and use that. Back in the old days, they didn't have those electric grinders, of course, so then they would have had to either use a file by hand or the leaded windows because of the lead channels that helped relieve some of that inaccuracy. So Matt's been working on cutting those pieces out, one cut at a time. So as you can see, he's got a few pieces here. We'll go over to our pattern and place them in. And you don't be alarmed, these aren't going to fit together perfectly. We're cutting them by hand. The next step in assembling a panel would be to go to that grinder where you can grind them down to shape a little bit more. So to finish it up here, I will continue cutting this petal of our tulip. So I start at one end, go all the way through and off. Another thing in the beginning with students that I remind them of is you have made your pattern piece grow by tracing it with that marker. You've added that extra thickness. So as you feel more comfortable cutting, you want to try to get the cutter on the inside of that black line. That will save you time later when you get to the grinder. The surface that we're cutting on, we have the cutting grids here that help these glass pieces fall through. Every time you make a cut, you get little glass shards that fall through to the bottom of those grids. If you're not used to cutting on a grid, another great surface is called homosote, which is the surface on the table. That surface is also flame retardant, so you use it a lot you'll see it a lot in construction. So I'm going to get our last piece of glass cut out here. Get it in place, and we'll have our pattern all cut and ready for the next step. If you're interested in taking a class or finding out more information, you can contact the Glass Lady Studio out in Lake Park. And that is a beginning stained glass piece.